Welcome back to another opportunity to learn, grow, and unlearn all of that shit that is keeping us in that anxious, powerless state, and instead shifting into that power and that peace that resides at living in our core self. And today I want to dive right into a very common pattern that keeps us from living in our core and instead helps us to live in that anxiety and all the feelings and the thoughts that are associated with that anxiety. And that is when we become triggered and we have the anxiety come as a result of that trigger. It's very common, and this is something that I experienced many times when I was younger, so I'm really speaking directly to myself, and I still experience it sometimes today, is I criticize myself for the anxiety that I'm experiencing and the action that came as a result of the anxiety and the trigger that I experienced. And what happens when I criticize myself and I get into this zone of being hard on myself, I'm actually perpetuating that anxious feedback loop and that spiral of anxiety to keep going forward. Because when we're hypercritical of ourselves for having that anxiety, then we become anxious about how we're showing up. Why we still have anxiety? How are we going to be viewed as a person for having this response? Right? And it just goes on and on and on, and it can bring us from that level 1 or 2 anxiety into a level 9 or 10 anxiety very quickly. And so what we're replacing this pattern with is instead when we are triggered and we have the anxiety come as a result of that trigger and an action maybe as a result of that anxiety, we are going to introduce compassion and acceptance, and recognizing two very important things that will help us shift into seeing this as an opportunity so that we can empower ourselves. Number one is that it's so normal for us to be having this trigger and this anxiety with the experiences and the conditioning that we have had in our lives. When we were children, maybe we experienced certain traumas, or we had certain relationships with our mother or father. Maybe we had certain experiences in our schooling experience, or any time that led up to this moment that we are experiencing this trigger. It's normal for us to respond this way because this is how we were conditioned, this is how we were taught, and this is how a trauma etched itself into our nervous system. So it's normal to respond this way and sometimes lose ourselves because of how deep some of these experiences have been. The second thing that is important to recognize here, and we talk about this often on the channel because it's so empowering to view it this way, is that each moment that we are triggered, that we are experiencing anxiety, we are getting an opportunity to work through that trigger to the other side, which is liberation. In other words, every trigger is an opportunity to our own personal freedom, because the triggers are showing us that this is where the work is, this is where we're still getting caught up, this is where we are losing ourselves. And so when we can work through where we're losing ourselves, then we can come back to ourselves, because when we work through it, we aren't getting lost in it anymore. We aren't so reactive to it. And so there's two really important things here to remember, is that when we are responding to these triggers and this anxiety with compassion, we are breaking a pattern. Because when we can introduce compassion, we are letting go of the criticism, number one. But also when we are introducing compassion, we are making it easier for us to have creativity and clarity to go about how we truly want to respond to this trigger, how we want to work through this trigger, and how we want to work through this anxiety, which again helps us to break through that pattern, which is really gigantic for being able to heal through that anxiety and no longer be the victim of the anxiety, but rather be in control of ourselves and how we want to show up in the world. And a perfect example for you here is that when I first started producing these YouTube videos in 2016 on anxiety, I became super anxious sometimes because I would make a video, I would think it was terrible, and I would get caught up in that perfection negative feedback loop, which caused me anxiety. I would judge myself and criticize myself even more for it not being where I wanted. And then you know what? I wouldn't even make that video. I'd leave, I wouldn't make the video, and that wasn't getting me anywhere. I was just getting further caught up in that trigger of perfectionism and that anxiety. Now, when I produce a video and I get upset with the quality of it or how it came out, I accept the reality. I recognize the perfection trying to swindle me into its grasps, and instead I recognize that, okay, this is an opportunity to not get caught and just create it again if it really does need to be created again, or recognize that there's actually some power in this video and I'm really happy with it. It's being able to work through these patterns right in the moment and these triggers right in the moment. And I just want to clarify again that it's so natural for us to be getting worked up or being triggered as a result of some of the experiences and the conditioning that we've had. And so when you find yourself really harsh on yourself for having anxiety or criticizing yourself for still being in a place where you have anxiety after having done so much work, I want to share with you that if you have had 25 years of experience before starting to do the work, then it's going to take some time to work through a lot of the patterns that are embedded in our minds, in our brains, and in our nervous system altogether. And so re-regulating our nervous system, re-regulating some of the pathways in our mind with that neuroplasticity, the plasticity of how our mind works, being able to shift it and meld it in different ways so that we can unlearn habits and relearn new ones. It takes time to do this. And so having that compassion for ourselves is going to make it easier, because when we have compassion for ourselves, all of the creativity and clarity stays online so that we can continue to move forward with much more ease instead of the criticism that is just giving us heavier emotions, is giving us short breathing and keeping us in an anxious state that's not helping us move forward. This is really important to come back to. And one thing that can really help you when you're in this state of triggered, anxious, and reacting and then criticizing yourself, when you catch yourself that you've started to criticize yourself, or when you've caught yourself in the trigger in general, being able to take deep breaths in through the nose and deep into the belly for several minutes, whatever it is that you need, depending on how intense the trigger is, could shift our physiological state so that we aren't being so totally wrapped up in whatever the experience is. We can keep our prefrontal cortex online, keep the brain online, keep the nervous system in a state of ease so that we can go about this much easier instead of getting wrapped up in it. Because when we start to lose our physiology, when we start to lose our nervous system into something, then it becomes much more difficult to respond healthfully to something instead of negatively and reactively to something. This is super, super important, just to remember that compassion is going to make our growth that much quicker and that much easier, whereas the criticism is going to hold us back and make it that much longer. If I had come across this sooner, I could be even further along. And yet, at the same time, I'm very happy with my journey because we are all where we are supposed to be at this moment. This is an opportunity to get clear on our triggers, to work through our triggers, and to recognize that criticism is not going to help us forward. And as always, I encourage questions. I encourage comments. Did this work for you? Has this not worked for you in the past? When we have multiple perspectives from different people, it allows us to really evolve together, because that person's growth becomes our growth and that person's growth becomes our growth. And we get to collectively evolve together through that anxiety, right? And it makes it that much quicker too when we can have this safe space to grow in. And as always, two things. Every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, I am holding a meditation group so that we could really come together and create space around our triggers so that we don't get so lost in them. We have some space in between us and them so that we can respond instead of react. Every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, you could check out the link below. It's all donation based. You could donate a penny or you can donate as much as you want. Totally accessible. The second thing is, if you are wanting to really bring all of these different principles together to move through this anxiety, to move through this stress, and you're wanting a little bit more of a personal approach so that it's really focused on you, I now get to offer coaching, which I've said in past videos I wanted to do since 2016 when I really started this journey. So if you're interested, you can check out that link below too. We can have a conversation, see if it's for you. If it's not for you, then hey, we're all on our journey and we're all where we're supposed to be at this point in time. I look forward to seeing you in the next video or in the comments below. And if you want anything to be private, any conversations, you could reach out to me on Instagram and we could talk there and we could have a conversation and answer some questions personally. Much love to you. And we'll see you very soon, if not in the comments, then in the next video.